I give the floor to Mr. Tor Wennesland.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, over 7 months have now passed since 7 October. The horrific terror attacks perpetrated by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups and the ensuing Israeli military campaign and relentless hostilities in Gaza have caused widespread suffering and at a scale totally unimaginable. There are reports that more than 36,000 Palestinians and over 1,500 Israelis and foreigners are killed, and still 125 hostages are held in Gaza, and tens of thousands of people injured, the vast majority Palestinians. Nearly 2 million Palestinians have been displaced from their homes in the Gaza Strip, many of them multiple times, and some 100,000 Israelis have been displaced from communities in Israel's north and south. Agreement on a deal to achieve a ceasefire and secure the release of hostages is blocked, and as Israel rolls out significant ground operations in and around Rafah, the devastation is only intensifying. The appalling incidents last Sunday, when a reported 45 Palestinians were killed and 200 injured as the tents they were sheltering in burned around them, does not stand alone amid shocking numbers of civilian casualties. I remind all parties on their obligations to protect civilians. At the same time, the occupied West Bank remains a pressure cooker of negative trends. The risk of a regional conflagration is constant and is mounting every day this war continues. This trajectory must change if we are to avoid further catastrophe. I urge all parties to return to the negotiation table immediately and in good faith. I reiterate my and the Secretary General's repeated calls for immediate release of hostages held in Gaza and for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Mr. President, Palestinians in Gaza face another round of mass displacement, with 1 million fleeing from Rafah, many being displaced multiple times. Overcrowded conditions and acute shortage of food, water and medicine have led to misery and spread of diseases. The humanitarian response is hopefully inadequate to address these needs. On 24 May, the International Court of Justice delivered its order on the request of South Africa for the modification of the order of 28 March in the case concerning applications of the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, confirming its previous provisional measures and indicating new measures. Humanitarians are heroically continue to deliver life-saving assistance in the incredibly difficult environment. Unsafe conditions resulting from dangerously deficient humanitarian notification mechanisms are compounded by overcrowding, desperation, and a breakdown of law and order, imperiling humanitarian operations and costing the lives of humanitarian workers, including some 200 UN staff. Just hours ago, Mr. President, this breakdown of law and order has resulted in a well-organized looting of the UNRWA Rafah log base, making it more or less inoperative. And this is the key center of our operations. While we are still investigating the circumstances, I condemn any violence on UN premises. As I briefed this council a little over a week ago, the opening of 2 crossings in the north alongside with the entry of humanitarian goods arriving from Ashdod and from Jordan, as well as through the UN-built floating pier via Cyprus, which is, by the way, now under repair, are positive developments, but highly insufficient. I reiterate the Secretary General's call for an immediate reopening of the Rafah crossing and for impeded humanitarian access throughout the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, let me also focus on the occupied West Bank, where violence and other negative trends continue in an alarming rate. Large-scale Israeli operations persist, which are often met by lethal exchanges with armed Palestinians, as well as a spike in settler violence and attacks by Palestinians against Israelis. Friction points around the settlements are getting worse as the settlement enterprise expands in a very well-planned manner. I am particularly concerned by Israel's lifting of the military order banning Israelis from entering 3 evacuated settlements in the northern West Bank, a policy in effect since 2005 disengagement law was put in place. I do take note of the subsequent military order declaring the area closed military zones, effectively preventing the entry of Israelis and Palestinians. Around in the region, the threat of a serious escalation has intensified. Exchanges of fire across the blue line between Israel and Hezbollah and other non-state armed groups in Lebanon continued. In addition to the deeply concerning escalation between Israel and Iran witnessed last month, aerial attacks towards Israel from militants in the region and Houthi attacks against international shipping in the Red Sea persisted. This is a combustible mix. Mr. President, it is clear that all sides must urgently change course. It is right that we are all focused on preventing a further deterioration of looking for a solution to the most pressing needs, yet without linking these urgent efforts to a longer-term political strategy, any solution will be short-lived or even counterproductive. No attempts to address the humanitarian security challenges will be sustainable unless it's a part of a broader approach that addresses Gaza's political future. That future is an integral part of a single unified Palestinian state, which is a crucial foundation for realizing a two-state solution. This has been a continuous and will continue to be the key focus of my own efforts. Throughout the last months, the Secretary General and I have engaged extensively with the parties, the region and international actors to encourage a common approach to addressing the complex humanitarian, security and political crisis affecting not only Gaza, but the whole of the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel and the region. We must reach an agreement to release the hostages and put in place an immediate ceasefire. There is absolutely no time to lose. The UN remains in regular contact with the mediators and parties, and we are committed to support and implement any such agreement. A sustained ceasefire will be critical to a full-scale humanitarian and early recovery response to meet the immense needs in Gaza. At the same time, we should be putting in place the framework for Gaza recovery and doing so in a way that is tangible for moves forward rather than away from a long-term political solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I have previously outlined some of the key principles that should guide us in that work, and allow me to reiterate and expand several of them here. There should be no long-term Israeli military presence in Gaza, while at the same time Israel's legitimate security concerns, particularly in the wake of the acts of terror committed on 7 October, must be addressed. Secondly, Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a future Palestinian state with no reduction in its territory. Number 3, Gaza and the West Bank must be unified politically, economically and administratively. They must be governed by a Palestinian government that is recognized and supported by the Palestinian people and the international community. Transitional arrangements are required. They must be designed to achieve a unified Palestinian government within a precise and limited time frame. There can be no long-term solution in Gaza that is not fundamentally political. Mr. President, my message in Brussels, where we met with the international partners meeting on Palestine, was along these lines. That is the same message I'm giving you today, and it's straightforward and it's urgent. We must strengthen and preserve the institutions of the Palestinian Authority before it is too late, while rejecting any steps that seek to systematically undermine its viability, such as the ongoing Israeli withholding of the PA's clearance revenues. It is a very serious fiscal situation for the Palestinian Authority, Mr. President. I warned over a year ago that 30 years of state building in Palestine were at grave risk. That is even more true today, and the consequences are even more serious. Affirming a path to the two-state solution means preserving and safeguarding the very institutions that are meant to govern such a state. Moreover, these institutions will be vital to the essential objective of ensuring Palestinian-led governments in Gaza. The new technocrat Palestinian government under Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa, with 8 ministers from Gaza, represent an important opportunity for all of us to support a tangible step in the right direction and in line with the principles for Gaza's future, as I just outlined. The international community should provide support to and work with the new government to address PA's dire fiscal crisis, strengthen its governance capacity and prepare it to reassume its responsibility in Gaza and, ultimately, govern the whole of the occupied Palestinian territory. Political, institutional and economic reforms will be needed, but they must be achievable, credible and financed. We should ensure that the Palestinian authorities is an integral part of planning for Gaza's recovery and reconstruction. I urge all actors to recognize the critical role of the PA and how that could be played out in Gaza, and work towards enabling its return, because there is actually no credible alternative. We already know that the scale of damage is immense. The World Bank and the UN, together with support from the EU, conducted an interim damage assessment of the impact of the first 4 months of the conflict in Gaza, quantifying the cost at that point of physical damage to critical infrastructure like hospital, housing and basic roads to be around $8.5 billion. The final cost will be multiples of this figure. The massive scale of these efforts will clearly require mobilization of the widest possible coalition of donors, private sector sources and financing, and significant improvement as to how reconstruction and materials should be able to enter into the Strip. We know already that donors and investors will not be forthcoming without concrete steps by the parties to find a political solution and ensure that Gaza is not rebuilt only to be destroyed yet again. Let me be clear. The political framework and structures we establish now will play a significant role in the success or failure of what follows. This requires us to plan and act deliberately and thoughtfully, knowing that today's decisions will not only shape the future of governance in Gaza, but also determine the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts more broadly. Mr. President, I'm aware of the many challenges in trying to achieve these objectives while war rages in Gaza and while our attention is rightly focused on urgent needs on the ground. But it is time for making difficult political choices. If we neglect to lay the foundations of a lasting resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and end the occupation, the price of failure will reverberate for generations. These foundations will not only be laid in Gaza but also in the occupied West Bank, and they must be set in place not just by donors and the international community, but by committed leaders on all sides of this conflict. The drivers of conflict must be addressed, including violence, settlement advancement, and military activity. Israeli measures that undermine PA must halt now. Without progress on each of these, we will begin the process of undermining what we have not yet even started. After the horrors of the past 7 months and the past days, Palestinians and Israelis desperately need a political horizon. Without it, there is no sustainable path out of the suffering and misery we are witnessing every day. Thank you.